Hello, and welcome to Broads and Books. I'm Amy.
And I'm Erin, and this is a special Broads and Books bonus episode.
Today on the Broads Talk Books With, we've got Celia Laskey, author of Under the Rainbow.
And Amy recommended her book in episode 71, where we talked about not being ready to make nice.
Not ready to make nice.
No.
That was fun.
That was great.
Yeah. We got Celia on Zoom, and she told us about her changing book tastes, the books that have inspired her, and her amazing pop culture obsessions.
She had us in severe guffaws by the end of this.
On a scale of guffaws, there was like mild, medium, severe.
Yes.
I'm kind of mixing the scales, but we were on
severity was high.
Yeah, the spice level was 5.
Spice level?
It was wonderful, and a sign of where all of our mental health was while recording. Pre-election, pre-second lockdown, pre-now.
Pre-now, yes. So we've put all the books that Celia mentions in the show notes, so you can add them to your TBR pile.
And now, here's our interview with Celia Laskey. What was your favorite book as a kid or a teen? Did you have one favorite? Did you have multiple favorite? What were your favorites growing up?
It's hard to remember what I was reading when I was like pre-high school, but I think my favorite book in high school was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I think that was the first book where I was really like, oh, these are things you can do with sentences. And I was really into John Irving. I read, A Prayer for Owen Meany, A Widow for 1 Year. I remember feeling very like salacious reading those sex scenes in my childhood bedroom. Yes. And who else? John Updike. I read a lot of John Updike. So, a lot of the sort of classics, I guess, in high school.
But you found them, you enjoyed them, and you found a way to get into them. Because sometimes I think we've talked about classics that can be difficult to get into.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, I didn't really know that there were other options, So like, if I were to read those books again now, I would probably be like, oh, the white manness of it all, Right. But back then I was like, well, this is what there is to read. So I'm perfectly happy to read it. My horizons were just very circumscribed back then. So I would actually be interested to see what I would think if I like picked up The Great Gatsby today. Like, I know that there are some definite queer like undertones going on that I would probably feel like are overtones these days. But yeah, I would be so interested to go back and read what I was reading then and see how critical I would be of it. Probably very.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about, or we've heard from listeners particularly, is that maybe some of their reading life was stunted at the beginning because they encountered a classic that they were like, I can't relate to this at all. And so one that we've talked about that we both struggled with was Moby Dick. Do you remember a classic that you struggled with, or?
I've never read Moby Dick, actually.
Don't worry about it. Don't,
Just skip it. Just skip it.
A classic that I struggled with. I remember Hemingway could sometimes be a little hard to get into. I remember, was it The Sun Also Rises, where, I mean, at that age, you literally don't understand that the main character has like lost, some of his genitals in the war. And you're like, oh, why can't these two characters be together? What's wrong? And I think there's just so much that goes over our heads.
When you think about it, why are we reading that in high school? That's so weird.
Yeah.
I would be really curious what kinds, if they're still teaching all of those books in high school today in like small suburban towns, or if they've opened it up a little bit. I really, really hope that they've opened it up a little bit.
Yeah. I had forgot that whole thing. I think I was one of those that it just kind of went over my head when I read that too.
I think our teacher like very thankfully sort of spelled it out for us at one point. But until she said something, I had no idea.
Oh my gosh. And can you imagine being a teacher and, describing that to a group of adolescents. That doesn't sound good. It doesn't.
Yeah.
You know what? We're just going to skip this book. I changed my mind. We're just not going to read it. Free period. We're done.
Yeah.
Do you remember around the same age or maybe college or later, were there authors or books that made you want to be a writer?
Yeah, well, I think from high school to college, I sort of moved on from white men to white women.
Well, there you go.
So,
yeah.
Opened up a tiny little bit. I was so into like Amy Bloom and Alice Munro and who else? A Visit from the Goon Squad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Who else? Oh, Ann Beattie.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if there was a white woman who wrote short stories, I was into her. So it's so embarrassing, like talking about this stuff, because you're just, it's so circumscribed. I read much more widely now.
Yeah.
But yeah, in college, it was definitely like, I was really into short stories, and I was really into, a lot of the women who were writing short stories at that time.
Thinking about your reading life a little bit now, how many books would you say are on your to be read pile? And are there a few that you're willing to share that you're excited to get to?
Yeah,
I always love facial expressions when we
I do,
ask this, because everyone's like, there's a
I
lot.
have so many. I'm trying to think about the most recent ones. I just finished Luster by Raven Leilani, and man, can that woman write a sentence, like a hilarious, specific sentence.
Yes.
I just started Shuggie Bain by Douglas Stewart, which, has been getting all kinds of acclaim, and so far it's very good. I was just alerted that I can now check out The Death of Vivek Oji by Ekwe Emezi. And I love Freshwater and I love Pet, so I'm really excited to read that one. Those are the ones that are on the top of my mind.
Isn't that a moment of joy when you get a library notice that your books are in?
But they always come at the same time.
Oh,
yes.
Like, oh my God, I've got to race through these.
Oh, that's the worst. And it always I get one email and then it's like ding ding. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, it's great, but it's the worst. Like, how am I going to read all these in this short amount of time?
Yeah, I think I've read 2 books so far just this week because I'm trying to get through them.
Yeah, I'm racing against a turning in deadline, and I still have 3 books to go. So I don't think it's going to happen by Tuesday, but I'm trying.
What are you guys reading right now?
I just started Thick and Other Essays.
Oh, I've heard that's really good.
Yeah, so far, really interesting. I like it. What about you, Erin? What are you reading?
I just started Sarah Vaughan's she wrote Anatomy of a Scandal that I really liked. It's fiction. Yeah. She just came out with one called Little Disasters. That's about kind of a woman going through some postpartum issues. So, so far it's been great. Yeah, she's very gripping. Cool. Kind of an easy read in between some other stuff.
A palate cleanser. You need
it. Is. Yeah, it is. It was needed. Yeah, after the last couple. Yes.
Celia, do you have a book that has maybe surprised you recently?
I think probably the most surprising book that I've read within the last year-ish is, and I don't think I'm pronouncing this correctly. I've heard the author pronounce it, and I know she pronounces it correctly than me, but I can't remember. Nama by Sarah Blake.
Oh, okay.
Either of you read that? I think it came out a year or 2 ago, and it's a feminist retelling of the Great Flood and Noah's Ark from the perspective of Noah's wife.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
It is wild. You could never guess the things that are going to happen in this book. There's some underwater sex with an angel.
Sold. I'm in.
I am in.
There are these dream interludes where the main character is flying around with this bird. And that there's tons of queerness. It is just so fantastically strange. It will,
right up our alley. Yes,
it will take you out of this reality, which I think we all need.
Yeah, that maybe I'm going to put that to the top of the list. It needs some, anti-reality. Yeah.
Yeah. And then another book I just read that surprised me, not really in a plot sense, but just sort of like how amazing it was How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. And I know that I'm like super behind the times on getting to that one, but I don't generally read memoirs. And this one just like blew my head off. It was so good. So yeah, I would say that one was surprising just by like how much I felt connected to it, whereas I don't normally feel connected to memoirs. And then another one that I feel like not enough people have heard of is Delayed Rays of a Star by Amanda Lee Coe. And it focuses on these 3 women in Hollywood, sort of like throughout the 20th century. Marlene Dietrich, Leni Riefenstahl, and Anna May Wong. And it sort of like sticks to the facts of their life, but then fictionalizes things in between. And it's also got some queer stuff going on. And there are chapters that take place from characters who are not those 3 main characters. Like one of the chapters even is from the POV of a wolf that's like on a shoot with Leni Riefenstahl.
Awesome.
And it's really, really surprising, really good. And it makes me upset that I didn't like hear more about it, because it was just fantastic.
Wow, those all sound fantastic.
Yeah.
Now
I got to get on my library right now. How do you normally find book recommendations?
Well, let's see. My best friend, Abigail, she's also a voracious reader. And actually for most of my life, she's been a person who's recommended books to me. Like back when I was reading John Updike and John Irving, she was the one to recommend those books to me. And she's a metal worker, and so she listens to audiobooks all day in her studio while she's like making jewelry, making whatever. So she just like chugs through books, and she'll text me, a couple times a week, just read this one, it was so good. Yeah. And we have very much the same tastes. Like we don't really have patience for anything that's like, speaking of my evolution as a reader, we don't really have much patience for like the cishet white male
straight white dudes. Yep.
Yeah. So I can always trust that she's gonna, be on the same page in recommending stuff to me. And then Twitter, authors and reviewers that I follow, prize nominations, and then lists, the dreaded lists, that authors are like, oh no, I didn't make XYZ list. But if I'm ever really in the need for something specific, I'll search like best queer books 2020 or like, best books, whatever with, the year. And, you'll find some good lists that way. So all kinds of different ways, really.
Yeah. That's
and bookstagrammers. I feel like bookstagrammers are a new way that I get recommendations. I didn't follow a lot of them until my book came out. And then I was like, oh, all these people are tagging me. Like, oh, they've got all these great things that they're reading. So yeah, now I definitely see a lot of books that way too.
It's a whole new beautiful world that we've been dipping into too. It's so cool.
Right.
We recommended Under the Rainbow in our last episode, and thinking about, interesting that you mentioned short stories, and Jennifer Egan in particular. I love how this is all separate short stories. Were there particular books you think that inspired you in writing your book?
Oh, definitely. I think that there were books that not only inspired me, but served as like blueprints, I was actually writing this book while I was in an MFA program. And so in my final year, I was able to design a self-study class. And so I read a ton of novels and stories, which is like technically what Under the Rainbow is, as a way to study, what they were doing and see how I could replicate it. And I would say the ones that ended up being the most useful for me were Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Strout. That was like my Bible when writing Under the Rainbow. I just think that book is so amazing. And I recently read Olive again. So if you haven't read Olive again, it's just as good as the original.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then In Other Rooms, Other Wonders by Danielle Monoiden. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but that was also a novel and stories that all sort of center around a Pakistani landowner and all of the people who either like work for them or are related to them. And it's very much about like class and, you know, the struggle between the classes. And all of the stories were very subtle, like to the point sometimes of confusion, especially like I taught that book to some of my students while I was in my program, and they were just like, we have no idea what the fuck is happening in any of these stories, you know, like they were so confused. And I had to explain to them, you know, sometimes ambiguous endings can be nice, you know, it's good to sort of wonder what exactly the author was doing. And then the other one was The Imperfectionists by Tom Rockman. And that's another book that I feel like not many people have heard of. But it tells the story of all the people who work for an English language newspaper that's based in Rome. And yeah, each chapter just really delves into each character. And that one was also really good.
Excellent. Wow. These all sound terrific. It reminds me of, we talked to Julia Phillips a while back, and her sort of novel and stories. And it's such a unique way of, you know, telling a story and hearing from all these different people and getting a, you know, a sum that's potentially greater than the parts.
Yeah, I feel like it's what young writers especially do, because we're only ever taught to write short stories.
Yeah.
But then as soon as you enter the publishing world, everyone knows that short stories don't really sell. So they're like, how can we have this writer who only knows how to write short stories publish something that people will buy, a novel and stories, you know? So I definitely came up with the idea on the book based on that sort of like limitation that I didn't feel capable at that point in my life of writing a novel that was like from the perspective of one character, sort of like linear in time. So yeah, I think that's why you do see so many novels and stories, especially from young writers. But I'll probably return to that form again at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, you may be discounting yourself, because I think that, you know, it's such a unique way if you're able to draw a through line through the stories versus, you know, just have a collection of stories and disparate stories.
Yeah.
And we've done enough reading lately. It seems like if we've hit a few of those where there was, you know, a novel and stories, and it's almost hard to go back to a novel because I'm like, no, wait, I want to know what everyone's thinking and doing. Like, how about we find out about that guy over there? Yeah. So it's great. Well, we like to ask 5 questions of everyone, that kind of a top 5. What would you say has been your most memorable fan interaction?
Well,
it could be weird, funny, whatever.
Yes.
I don't think that I've had anyone approach me in real life about the book. I've gotten like some really nice messages on the internet about it. Nothing too memorable. I did meet Garth Greenwell recently. I went to a reading that he did at Skylight. And I mean, there was nothing especially special about it, but it was just really nice for me to meet him, because he's one of the writers that I've really admired for a long time. And I think he's just one of like the greatest thinkers of our time, probably. He just has such a interesting worldview. And, you know, to just sit there and listen to him talk for an hour was like very mind expanding. So it was really nice to get to meet him.
I agree. I watched him speak, I think at AWP in 2019. And just the way that he speaks, and, you know, of course, very thoughtful, but also just sort of calming too. It was very, very nice.
Yeah.
Who, besides Garth, was there anyone else that you wanted to meet, other authors, other writers, and that you got to meet?
I met Brandon Taylor recently, also at Skylight. And I follow him on Twitter, you know, and he's just such a personality. So it was also really lovely to meet him. But I would say that there are still a lot of people that I would like to meet that I haven't.
I imagine this year has gotten in the way since.
Exactly. I was just going to say this pandemic has probably curtailed, you know, those ways I would have to meet a lot of other authors. Because, you know, this Under the Rainbow is my first book. And so I feel like this year would have been kind of my first opportunity to meet a lot of other writers.
Yeah.
So.
Did you have events planned that were canceled because of the?
Well, we did the local one in LA. It was like the week before things got really bad. And, you know, my wife and I actually were talking about the other day, the fact that that event was even held, you know, and that like I hugged my friends as they showed up, you know, and like we ate a cracker pack on the way home and like, you know, sloppily put some hand sanitizer on our hands and we're like, and ate the crackers. You know, after I had signed like, you know, 25 to 50, like touching all of these things and just eating crackers, you know, so it was really surreal to look back and just remember what life used to be like before you had all of these things that you have to be worrying about.
This constant crushing anxiety.
Yes. Yeah.
How would you say that your reading life has changed since you became a published author?
I feel like there are books that I read now, sort of sometimes out of a sense of obligation almost. It's like, oh, well, that writer told me that they really liked my book and they have a book that's come out around the same time. So I should definitely read that book so that I can, you know, say something nice back to them. Yeah, I think there's definitely a little bit more of a sense of that. And then I think I'm also just a little bit more aware that came out this year in a way that I haven't been in previous years, because, you know, you're looking at all of these lists that you have or have not been featured on. And, you know, you just become a little bit more involved with all of the other people who are writing these books. So yeah, I would say it's more of a blend of like books that I want to read and books that I feel like I should read at this point. Whereas in the past, it was more like I was just reading whatever I wanted to. And a lot of the books that I feel like pressured into reading end up being wonderful books that I really enjoy, you know, but it's definitely like more of that now.
You're being a good literary citizen.
Well, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have, you know, thinking of some of your favorite books, perhaps, do you have a book that you think everyone should read?
Yeah, I feel like, at least for me, the book that I feel like is the most perfect possible form of a book is Edinburgh by Alexander Chee. I just feel like on every level, that book is as close to perfection as you can get. And especially like for queer people, I would say it's like a really quintessential book that you've got to read. And then over the course of this pandemic, I've sort of gone on an expedition to educate myself about history in a way that I probably would not have done before this pandemic, but it's just like, what else am I going to do? And history was always sort of like a hard subject for me when I was younger. I just felt like I never really retained anything in the way that I wanted to. So I read A People's History of the United States and Stamped from the Beginning. And I would say that those two books drastically changed the way I think about this country and the way I think about our history. And I think if there's anyone who's even slightly inclined to, you know, learning the truth of this country, read those two books. And I feel like if enough of the population could read those books and could know all the facts that are contained in them, we would all want a different type of government. You know, like it would get us to that point where we would all be like dissatisfied enough with this system that we have. So don't get me started. I could go on for ages about those two books.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned the People's History, Howard Zinn. He has an Instagram account, the Zinn Education Project, where it's them going into schools and trying to teach, you know, the real history. And of course, facing so much pushback. And it's a really interesting account. It might be one you want to follow. Yeah.
Yeah, because the amount that we are just straight up lied to in classrooms throughout the course of our lives is maddening. You know, it's just, and I know the reason why, you know, it's very obvious why, but like if we could have read a People's History in high school, how different our understanding of the world would have been, you know, and I probably would have retained a lot more, because it's so much more interesting when you know the actual truth, as opposed to, like, you know, the whitewashed winners version.
Yeah. And much more personal. It felt like, you know, real people versus just a list of presidents that, you know, everyone says are great.
Yeah. Yeah. Or all these heroes that turned out to be, you know,
not so
pretty
much
despicable people.
Right. Well, at the end of each episode, we talk about some of our favorite pop culture obsessions at the time. What's your current pop culture obsession?
Oh, man, this is another one where you're probably just going to have to cut me off at some point, because
bring it on. Let's hear it.
I could go. So a movie I watched recently that was so amazing was Wild Nights with Emily. Molly Shannon is the star, and it was sort of like an indie, sort of under the radar movie, all
nice
about
book
Emily.
Plug. I liked it.
I liked that. That was good.
Very slick.
It's all about Emily Dickinson and sort of blowing up, again, talking about how history just, you know, creates these lies that we are just fed over and over. You know, we're told that Emily Dickinson was this unloved recluse, you know, that, you know, she just like hung out alone in her house and never had a relationship. But actually, she was just a lesbian. She just was having a relationship with this woman from like her adolescence. And then this woman decided to marry Emily's brother as a way to stay close to Emily. And so they lived literally next door to each other in neighboring houses. And Emily and her lover, you know, were together their whole lives. And, you know, had just found this way to be together that and the people who documented Emily Dickinson's life did not acknowledge. It was very clear that they were together. I mean, many of her poems, her lover's name was even in these poems, and they were like erased, you know. So it was just really fascinating and hilarious to, you know, see all of this laid out for us. So definitely that. Music wise, I feel like this isn't anything special, but I basically, depending on my mood, go from Folklore by Taylor Swift to Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. So depending, if I'm in like a decent mood, I'm probably listening to Future Nostalgia. And if I'm like leaning toward depression, I'm listening to Folklore. So probably have been listening to Folklore a little bit more lately. But yeah, those albums are just like everything this past year. I don't know if this counts as pop culture, but fast food. I love fast food. And I've recently discovered the quesarito. Have you ever had a quesarito?
I don't think I've had the pleasure. What is a quesarito?
Okay, so this is a Taco Bell item.
Okay. I was gonna say Taco Bell.
As if you didn't know. But it is a burrito wrapped in a quesadilla.
Oh boy. So
you've got the cheesy goodness of the quesadilla encasing also some of the cheese that's in the burrito. So it's really just a cheese vehicle. I get the black bean version, and it's disturbing how often my wife and I get Taco Bell delivered to our door via Uber Eats because like we don't want to go out and get it ourselves.
That is probably the most telling sign of where you are at, you know, emotionally, mentally, everything. Yeah.
How many quesadillas per week are you eating? And just measure your depression per that number.
I think that's the best answer we've ever had to the pop culture question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it counts, but I love fast food.
I say it does.
I mean, yeah, does
I say
food
yes,
fall under pop culture?
Yes.
I feel like if it's fast food, it does.
Yeah, especially Taco Bell.
Yeah.
That's like the definition of pop culture food.
Yeah.
I didn't know they had that, but
well, get on it. Get on it. It is delicious. And then maybe one more.
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Tegan and Sarah did this Instagram live for a while called Where the Good Grows, which is sort of a pun on one of their song titles. Mm-hmm. And it's because Sarah has like a garden in her backyard that she's very obsessed with and very particular about. And so the premise of this Instagram live is that they talk about Sarah's garden and sort of like tour through the garden. But of course they end up, you know, talking about a bunch of other things. So they'll sort of like start out one of the episodes where like Sarah's showing us her new power tools, you know, like some new fancy lawnmower that she's got. And then they segue into like one of them talking about their night chores that they do before they go to bed every night, you know. And
that's
the two of them are just, I feel like some of the most particular idiosyncratic people that are like known to us. Mm-hmm. I would love to just do a character study about the two of them because they are just so interesting to me. So I just
you read their book. I forget what it was called.
High School.
Yes. Did you read that?
It's on my TBR.
Okay. Yeah. I haven't read it yet, but I was intrigued. Yeah.
I heard it was really, really good. And I'm not surprised because they're such introspective people, you know? And yeah, that really reminds me, I've got to move that to the top.
Wow. I mean, if you're going to Instagram live, that sounds like the way to do it.
Yeah. And they put all of the archived episodes up on YouTube so you can, you know, watch them from the past. So if you're interested in Tegan and Sarah at all, highly recommend.
I mean, they should also order Uber Eats and a quesarito to their Instagram live and get some free Taco Bell goodness.
I mean, I feel like neither of them, they were talking about trying to eat healthy on one of these things. That's you know, overrated. So I feel like maybe they wouldn't be down, but
that's too bad.
I think you should do that. Don't let them steal your publicity chance. I think you do it.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I am so willing to be like a brand, what do you call it? Like a brand ambassador or just like pimp myself out on social media for brands.
You should.
And I know they don't do that with writers, but it's like, use me, like give me money. I'll talk about the quesarito. I'll talk about honestly anything you want me to talk about, you know, just
it could be a plot point in your next
will.
book too. Yeah. I mean, the search for the quesarito. Yeah. I also saw, you know, one last note. I saw on your website that you have a dog named Whiskey.
Yes.
What's he been up to lately?
Well, he's sleeping right at the end of the bed right now. He's gotten super used to us never leaving the house. So my wife and I were thinking about journeying out to a beach this weekend for the first time, like since the start of the pandemic. I don't know if it's going to be successful, but we like texted our dog's babysitter and we were like, can you hang out with him for the afternoon? Because I really think that he would explode if we were gone from this house for more than like an hour. You know, he just has not been used to it at all.
Yeah. He would think you had died probably for that long amount of time.
Yeah. So he's, you know, he's probably living his best life right now because we're always around. We're so bored that we're playing with him all the time, you know? So I'd like to be in his brain right about now.
You know, that could be a way to shill for Taco Bell too. I mean, if you have a cute dog and you're talking about quesaritos all the time, that could be a power combination right there.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to reach out to them.
Okay.
They should really consider me.
Well, I'm
you
glad
should.
I'm glad we helped you find your future path.
Yeah,
And
forget the books. It's all about Taco Bell influencing now.
Influencing. Perfection.
Oh boy. Well, Celia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a really nice break in the day.
Excellent.
Oh, Aaron, I think just the Taco Bell part of the discussion was something that's going to stick with me for a long time.
No one has answered that question that way. And I loved it, and I delighted in it, and I still think it's the best answer I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And I hope she gets a deal.
I hope she does.
Taco Bell.
I want her to shill for it forever.
Do it.
Yeah. And we're glad, that we helped her find that path.
Yes.
Also, I think maybe going forward in our pop culture picks, we need to start picking food.
That's not a bad idea.
Right? Oh my God. It's opening up. The world is opening up to us.
It'd be a good way to get some sponsorships.
Oh, Reese's Pieces.
We're still coming after you.
Maybe just every episode I just need to say something about Reese's Pieces so we can just get there.
Just
hammer
that'd be
it in.
like a fun listener scavenger hunt. When is she going to work it in?
Mention it? Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. Yeah.
I love her enthusiasm for pop culture because I can relate. And it was
she
great.
was so excited. She had multiple things ready to talk about. She was in it.
Yes, I loved that. Loved it.
I like too that we talked a little bit about novels in stories and how there's quite a lot in that area that's just so gripping. It's so great, and it's how she formed her novel. And she loves them. She writes them. It was a fun discussion.
Yeah, it was a great discussion. I also really appreciate that she also suffers from library notification anxiety.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
So many books just came in.
So many books came in. And it's
What am
the
I gonna
feeling
do?
of like, oh, yay, I'm swimming in books. But also, oh, shit, I got to read all these books.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, she nailed it.
She really did.
That's for sure. Well, guess what? We will be back next Wednesday with our regular weekly themed episodes. But in the yeah, jazz. In the meantime, you can head to our website, broadsandbooks.com. Check out all of these episodes.
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our website, YouTube.
We got a YouTube channel.
We do.
Happy reading.